The first thing I saw when I pulled into the driveway was my suitcase lying in the mud. At first, I thought someone had robbed the house, but then I saw the rest of my life scattered across the yard, my clothes, my books, even the photo frame I kept by my bed, everything thrown out like garbage. And standing on the porch was my own mother. I had just finished a 10-hour shift at work. My back ached, my hands were still dirty from the warehouse, and all I wanted was a shower and a quiet night. But the moment I stepped out of my car, the cold evening air hit my face, and so did the reality of what I was seeing. My shoes slowly crunched over the gravel as I walked toward the yard. My backpack was ripped open. Papers were flying everywhere in the wind. I picked up a framed picture from the grass. It was the one from my high school graduation, the day I thought my mom was proud of me. The glass was cracked. My chest tightened. "Mom," I called out. She didn't move. She stood on the porch with her arms crossed, staring down at me like I was a stranger who had wandered onto her property. What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. Her answer came cold and sharp. "It means you're not living here anymore." For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. "Mom, I just came back from work," I said slowly. "What are you talking about?" She rolled her eyes like I was wasting her time. "You heard me. Pack your things and leave." I looked around the yard again. The cruel part was she had already done the packing. Everything I owned was lying in the dirt. My stomach dropped. Did I do something wrong? I asked quietly. Before she could answer, the front door opened behind her. And that's when I saw him, my stepfather, Carl. He leaned against the doorway with a smirk on his face like he had been waiting for this moment all day. Suddenly, everything started making sense. Carl had never liked me. From the moment my mom married him 2 years ago, it was clear he saw me as a problem. He used to make small comments. "You're too old to still be living here. You should start paying rent. You're taking advantage of your mother." Even though I worked full-time and paid for most of my own things. I looked back at my mom. Is this because of him? Her face hardened. "This has nothing to do with Carl." But Carl chuckled behind her. That sound alone told me everything. "You're 22. My mom continued. "It's time you start acting like an adult." I stared at her in disbelief. "I already do. I work every day." "Yes," she said, "but you're still living in my house." My hands slowly curled into fists. "This has been my home since I was 6 years old." Carl pushed the door open wider and stepped onto the porch. "Well," he said casually, "things change." The wind picked up again, blowing my clothes across the yard like trash. I bent down and picked up one of my notebooks. It was soaked from the wet grass. Inside that notebook were plans, ideas, things I had been quietly working on for months. Carl noticed it in my hands. "Oh, right," he said with a mocking grin. "Your little business idea." My stomach twisted. He knew about that. I looked at my mom again. "You told him." She didn't answer. That silence hurt more than anything she could have said. Carl walked a few steps closer to the edge of the porch. "You really thought that was going to work?" He laughed. "An online business? You can barely afford your own phone bill." My jaw tightened. He had no idea what he was talking about. But the worst part was my mom didn't defend me. Not once. Instead, she pointed toward the street. "You have 1 hour to take your things and leave," she said flatly. I stood there, surrounded by everything I owned, feeling like my entire life had just been erased. Neighbors were already watching from their windows. I could feel their eyes on me. Humiliation burned through my chest. Carl folded his arms and smiled. "Better hurry," he said, "or we'll start throwing the rest of your junk away." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I just stood there, breathing slowly, looking at the yard, the porch, and the 2 people who were supposed to be my family. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. At first, I ignored it, but it kept vibrating. I finally pulled it out and looked at the screen. The name that appeared made my heart skip. It was the investor. The same investor who had been reviewing my business proposal for the last 3 weeks. Carl noticed my expression. "What's that?" he asked mockingly. "Your boss calling to give you overtime." I didn't answer. Instead, I slowly lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said quietly. The voice on the other end sounded excited. "We've reviewed your project and we're ready to move forward." I froze. Carl was still smirking. My mom looked bored. Neither of them had any idea what that call meant. The voice continued speaking. "We're prepared to offer you the full investment amount." My eyes slowly moved back toward the porch. Carl's smile was still there. But in that moment, something inside me changed. Because suddenly, getting kicked out of that house didn't feel like the worst thing that had ever happened to me. In fact, it might have been the biggest mistake they had ever made. And neither of them realized it yet. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The cold evening air felt different now, almost lighter, like something heavy had just lifted off my chest. "Are you still there?" the voice on the phone asked. "Yes," I said quickly, forcing myself to sound calm even though my heart was pounding. "I'm here." "Well, loved your idea," the investor continued. "Your platform solves a real problem, and the numbers you showed us are very convincing. If you're ready, we can start the funding process immediately." I slowly turned away from the porch so Carl and my mom couldn't see my face. My hands were shaking. 3 weeks ago, I had sent my proposal to a small investment group online. I almost didn't send it. Carl had laughed at the idea for days after overhearing me talk about it on the phone. A kid from this house building a company, he had said. That'll be the day. Back then, I told myself I would prove him wrong one day. But I never expected that one day would start tonight standing in a yard full of my belongings. How much funding are we talking about? I asked carefully. There was a short pause. $200,000 to start, the voice said. My breath caught in my throat. 200,000. That number echoed in my mind like thunder. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. Of course, the investor added, this would be in exchange for a percentage of the company, but based on your projections, we believe the business could grow much larger. Carl suddenly called from the porch. Hey, you planning to stand there all night? I ignored him. Send me the documents, I said quietly into the phone. We'll email everything tonight, the investor replied. Once you sign, we can transfer the first portion of the funds. Thank you, I said. And for the first time that evening, I meant those words with everything in me. When the call ended, I slowly lowered the phone. The yard was silent except for the wind rustling through the scattered papers and clothes. Carl clapped his hands sarcastically. Wow, he said. That must have been important. My mom sighed impatiently. Stop wasting time and start packing your things. I looked down at the muddy grass, then at the broken suitcase near my feet. A strange calm settled over me. Don't worry, I said. Carl raised an eyebrow. I won't be here long. He laughed. Good. I bent down and started gathering my belongings. The neighbors were still watching, pretending not to, but I could feel their curiosity burning holes into my back. Every item I picked up felt like a memory, a hoodie I bought with my first paycheck, a notebook filled with late-night ideas. The cracked photo frame from my graduation. Carl watched the whole thing like it was entertainment. You know, he said, this might be the best thing that's ever happened to you. Maybe now you'll finally grow up. I zipped the suitcase slowly. You might be right, I said. He smirked, thinking I had admitted defeat. But inside my head, something else was forming. A plan, because as humiliating as this moment felt, it also gave me something powerful. Clarity. I stood up and looked at the house. The house I had lived in for 16 years. The porch light flickered above Carl and my mom. She avoided my eyes. Not once had she asked where I would go. Not once had she asked if I was okay. That hurt more than being kicked out. Carl pointed toward the street. Tick-tock. Your hour's almost up. I picked up my suitcase. You really think I'm going to miss this place? I asked quietly. Carl shrugged. You'll be begging to come back in a month. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked toward my car. The trunk creaked open as I lifted the suitcase inside. Piece by piece, I loaded the rest of my things. By the time the yard was empty, the sky had turned dark. Carl leaned against the railing. Well, he said, spreading his arms dramatically. Looks like the trash finally took itself out. I closed the trunk slowly, then I walked back toward the porch. Carl straightened a little, surprised I was coming closer. My mom shifted uncomfortably. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then I looked directly at Carl. You know what the funny part is? I said calmly. He frowned. What? You think you won tonight? Carl chuckled. Kid, I didn't just win tonight. I solved a long-term problem. My gaze didn't move, but problems have a way of coming back, I said. He rolled his eyes. Is this supposed to be a threat? No, I replied. It's a promise. My mom finally spoke. That's enough. Just leave. Her voice sounded tired, like she wanted the whole situation to disappear, so I nodded. Okay. I turned and started walking back to my car. Carl called after me one last time. Good luck with that business of yours. I opened the driver's door but paused before getting in. Without looking back, I said quietly, you'll hear about it soon enough. Then I got into the car and started the engine. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror. But instead of sadness, I felt determination burning in my chest. Because somewhere in my email inbox, a contract worth $200,000 was about to arrive. And Carl still thought I was the broke kid he had just thrown out of the house. He had no idea what was coming next. And the moment he finally realized the truth was going to be unforgettable. The road ahead of me was dark, but for the first time that night, I wasn't thinking about where I would sleep. I was thinking about the email, $200,000. Even saying the number in my head didn't feel real. My phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. I glanced down at the screen while stopped at a red light. The email had arrived. My heart started beating faster. I pulled into the parking lot of a small 24-hour cafe a few minutes later. The place was quiet, with only a few people inside working on laptops or drinking coffee. I grabbed my bag and walked in. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around me as soon as I stepped through the door. After standing outside in the cold all evening, it felt like stepping into another world. I ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu and sat down in the corner. My hands were still slightly shaking as I opened my laptop. There it was. The email subject, read investment agreement, pending signature. For a moment, I just stared at it. All the nights I had stayed awake working on this idea flashed through my mind. The countless hours after work. The times Carl mocked me from the couch. The times my mom told me I should focus on something realistic. Slowly, I clicked the email. The documents opened one by one. Legal terms, percentages, funding stages, timelines. But the number that kept catching my eye was the investment amount. 200,000. My breathing slowed as I read everything carefully. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't a dream. It was real. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the cafe. Nobody there had any idea that my entire life had just changed. An hour ago, I was standing in a yard full of my belongings, being kicked out of my own home. Now I was about to sign the deal that could start my company. The irony almost made me laugh. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from my mom. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before opening it. "Did you leave yet?" That was it. No apology, no concern, just that. I typed a reply, then erased it. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I opened the documents again. Every page I read made the reality sink in deeper. They believed in the idea. More importantly, they believed in me. Something no one in that house had done for years. I reached the final page. The signature line waited at the bottom. My name. My company name, my future. I hesitated for just a moment, not because I was unsure, because I knew the second I signed this, everything would begin moving fast. Responsibility, deadlines, expectations. But after everything that had happened tonight, fear wasn't the strongest feeling in my chest anymore. Determination was, so I picked up the pen and signed. The moment the ink touched the paper, a strange wave of calm passed through me. I scanned the signed documents and sent them back. A few minutes later, another email arrived confirming they had received everything. The first portion of the funding would be transferred within 48 hours. I closed the laptop slowly. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself to smile. Carl's voice echoed in my head. "You'll be begging to come back in a month." I shook my head slightly. If only he knew. The waitress came by to refill my coffee. "Long night?" she asked kindly. "You could say that," I replied. She smiled and walked away. I checked the time. It was already past midnight. Technically, I had nowhere to go, but somehow that didn't scare me anymore, because tonight hadn't taken something away from me. It had forced me forward. I packed up my laptop and stepped outside. The cold air hit my face again, but it didn't feel as harsh as before. I leaned against my car for a moment, staring up at the dark sky. Somewhere out there, the future was waiting, and the people who thought they had just gotten rid of me were about to learn a very expensive lesson. My phone buzzed again, another message, but this time, it wasn't from my mom. It was from an unknown number. I opened it slowly. The message read, "Hey, this is Mark from the investment group. We forgot to mention something important during the call earlier tonight." I frowned slightly. Another message appeared. "We've shown your proposal to one of our senior partners." A third message followed almost immediately, and he's very interested in meeting you personally. I straightened a little. Senior partner. That sounded serious. My phone buzzed again. "He'll be in town tomorrow morning." My heart skipped. "Tomorrow." I quickly typed a response. "Where?" The reply came within seconds. "At the Grand Meridian Hotel. Conference suit at 10 a.m. I stared at the message. The Grand Meridian was the most expensive hotel in the city. People like Carl bragged about going there. People like me usually only walked past it. But tomorrow morning I would be walking inside, not as a guest, as someone they wanted to meet. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and got into the car. As the engine started, I couldn't help thinking about the house again. About Carl leaning on that porch. About my mom standing there silently. They probably thought tonight was the end of my story. That kicking me out had closed the chapter, but in reality, it had only opened the first page, and tomorrow morning, something even bigger was about to begin. I barely slept that night. Most people would have gone home, laid in their own bed, and tried to calm their thoughts. But I didn't have that option anymore. Instead, I spent the night in my car parked near the cafe, going over my plans again and again. Strangely, I didn't feel miserable. If anything, I felt focused. For the first time in years, I wasn't trapped in that house with Carl's constant insults echoing through the walls. When the sun finally began rising, pale light spilled across the windshield of my car. Today was the meeting. I drove to a nearby gym, used their shower, changed into the cleanest clothes I had left, and checked my reflection in the mirror. Not perfect, but good enough. By 9:40 a.m., I was standing outside the Grand Meridian Hotel. The building towered above the street like something out of a movie. Glass walls reflected the morning sunlight, and luxury cars lined the entrance. For a brief moment, the old doubt crept into my mind. People like me didn't belong in places like this. But then I remembered Carl's voice. "You'll be begging to come back in a month." That memory burned the doubt away instantly. I walked inside. The lobby was massive, filled with polished marble floors and quiet conversations. Businessmen in suits walked past me while hotel staff moved quickly between guests. I checked in at the front desk and was directed to the conference floor. My palms were slightly sweaty as I approached the suite door. Room 407, I knocked. A calm voice from inside said, "Come in." The door opened to reveal a modern conference room with large windows overlooking the city. Two men were sitting at the table. One of them was Mark, the investor I had spoken to the night before. The other man stood up slowly as I walked in. He looked older, probably in his late 50s, wearing a sharp suit and an expression that felt both serious and curious. "Good morning," Mark said with a friendly smile. "You must be exhausted after last night." "A little," I admitted. The older man stepped forward and extended his hand. "I'm Richard Hale," he said. The name instantly rang a bell. Richard Hale was known in the business world. He had invested in several successful tech companies over the past decade. Meeting someone like him felt surreal. "It's nice to meet you," I said, shaking his hand. "Have a seat," he replied. We sat down at the table. For the next 40 minutes, they asked questions about my business idea. Not simple questions either, deep ones about scaling, marketing, competition, and long-term growth. At first, I was nervous. But after a few minutes, something changed. This was my idea. I knew it better than anyone. So I answered everything honestly and confidently. By the time the conversation ended, Richard leaned back in his chair and studied me quietly. Finally, he nodded. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," he said. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Then he slid a folder across the table toward me. "What's this?" I asked. "An offer," he replied. I opened the folder. Inside was a new proposal. My eyes widened as I read the number on the page. $750,000. My heart started pounding again. Richard folded his hands on the table. "I believe your company has more potential than the original investment covered," he said calmly. "So I'd like to expand the funding." For a moment, the room felt completely silent. $750,000. Less than 12 hours ago, I had been standing in a yard with my life thrown into the dirt. Now this. Mark smiled slightly. "So," he said, "what do you think?" I took a deep breath. I said slowly, "this is the opportunity of a lifetime." Richard smiled. "Good answer." 2 hours later, the updated agreement was signed. When I walked out of the Grand Meridian Hotel, the city felt completely different. The world suddenly seemed full of possibilities. Over the next 6 months, everything moved fast. The funding allowed me to build a platform I had dreamed about. I hired a small team, developers, designers, marketing specialists. We worked day and night, and slowly, the company began growing. Users started signing up, then more, then thousands. The idea Carl had laughed at turned into something real, something successful. One afternoon, nearly a year after the night I was kicked out, I found myself driving through my old neighborhood again, not because I needed to, but because I wanted closure. The car I was driving now was very different from the one I had owned back then. I parked across the street from the house. The same porch, the same front yard. For a moment, I just sat there remembering everything that had happened. Then the front door opened. Carl stepped outside. He froze when he saw me. At first, he didn't recognize the car. But when I stepped out, his expression changed instantly. Confusion, then shock. He slowly walked toward the edge of the yard.
"You,"
he said. I nodded calmly. He looked at the car again, then back at me. "I saw something online," he muttered. "A company with your name." I smiled slightly. "Yeah, that's mine." For once, Carl didn't have a clever insult ready. He just stood there staring. Then my mom appeared behind him. The moment she saw me, her face went pale. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Carl cleared his throat. "So things worked out for you," he said awkwardly. I looked around the yard, the same place where my belongings had once been thrown like trash. "Yes," I said quietly. "They did." Carl shifted uncomfortably. "Well, if you ever wanted to talk, or—" "I didn't come here for that," I interrupted calmly. I reached into my pocket and placed a small envelope on the mailbox. "What's that?" he asked. "Just something I owed myself," I replied. Without another word, I turned and walked back to my car. As I drove away, Carl opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, a printed screenshot, an article headline, "Local startup founder builds $20 million company," and underneath the headline, a photo of me. That night, as the house disappeared in my rearview mirror once again, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Because the truth was, getting thrown out of that house had been the best thing that ever happened to me. And the people who tried to break me had accidentally built the person who proved them wrong.